She was lost in the most violent storm the Wyoming frontier had ever seen when a man emerged from the shadows, shouting something that would change her life forever. "Come with me before it's too late," were his words, and the urgency in that voice seemed to carry secrets that went far beyond the rain and the thunder. Can you imagine being so desperate that you agree to follow a stranger into total darkness, not knowing if he is your salvation or your end? But this story actually happened in March of 1889, in the deep interior of the American West, on a night when the sky seemed to have declared war against the earth. Before we continue, tell me something. Where are you watching this story from? Write your city and state down in the comments. I love knowing that these tales from the old days reach so many different corners of our country. And if you're enjoying this, leave a like so more people can discover these real stories of courage and survival. Now come with me, and I'll tell you everything from the beginning. Cecilia Andrews was 19 years old, with hair as dark as a moonless night. She was the kind of young woman who drew attention not for screaming beauty, but for the way she looked at things with intent, as if she were always trying to decipher a riddle only she could see. The folks in the town of Blackwood Creek said she took after her mother, Amelia, God rest her soul. Cecilia's mother had died when she was only 9, taken by a sudden fever that no one could quite explain. Cecilia grew up listening to stories about her mother, about how Amelia was delicate yet strong, about how she could read and write in an era when few women had that privilege, about how she played the piano on Sunday afternoons. But there was one story Cecilia heard more than all the others, always told by her Uncle Sebastian with that solemn tone of someone carrying a painful truth. The story went that Cecilia's father, Anthony Andrews, had died of a heart condition 6 months before she was born. A young, strong, hard-working man, owner of prime land in the region, who simply sat in a chair after dinner, clutched his chest, and was gone. Just like that, without warning, without a chance for goodbye. Amelia was left a widow and pregnant, Uncle Sebastian would recount, with eyes watery with pity. She had to sell the land because she couldn't manage it alone. Colonel Augustus Vance, a man of standing, bought everything for a fair price and even allowed her to live in the big house until Cecilia was born. Afterward, Amelia went to live with her sister, raised the girl with the little she had, and when she passed, Cecilia went to the home of Uncle Sebastian and Aunt Margaret. Cecilia had grown up believing this story just as one believes in the sunrise. It was the truth that shaped her life, that explained why she had no father, why she had no land, why she depended on her uncle and aunt's charity. She carried these truths in her chest as if carrying heavy, immutable stones, and for 19 years she had never questioned a thing, until Colonel Augustus Vance asked for her hand in marriage. The proposal had come 3 months before that stormy night. The colonel had arrived at Uncle Sebastian's house on a December afternoon, mounted on a gleaming bay horse, bringing a box of fine chocolates from Cheyenne, and that smile that tried to be paternal but sent a chill down Cecilia's spine. He was 52 years old, almost 3 times her age. He had been a widower for 7 years, childless, owner of the most productive ranch in the territory. A powerful man, respected and feared. Uncle Sebastian had gone pale with joy when the colonel stated his intentions. Cecilia was in the kitchen, but she heard everything through the slightly open door. The colonel spoke with that deep, measured voice. "Miss Cecilia is a girl of good stock," he said, "daughter of the late Anthony Andrews, a friend of mine from days past. It would be an honor to unite our families through matrimony. She would have everything a wife deserves, a grand house, servants, respect. And you, Sebastian, would have the peace of mind knowing your niece is well established." Cecilia felt the floor drop out from under her. It wasn't love the colonel was offering, it was a transaction. She was a bargaining chip, a solution to the problem of being a solitary woman without a dowry. Uncle Sebastian had accepted right then and there, without even asking what she thought. Aunt Margaret had come running into the kitchen afterward, eyes shining with a happiness that looked sickly. "Cecilia, my girl, you don't know what a blessing this is," she had said, squeezing her niece's hands tightly. "The Colonel is a man of means. You'll have a good life. You'll never face hardship again." But Cecilia didn't want a good life bought with a loveless marriage. She had tried to protest that very night, when she was alone with her aunt and uncle. "Uncle Sebastian, I don't even know the Colonel," she had said, her voice trembling. "I feel nothing for him. I can't marry like this." Her uncle's face had hardened. "Cecilia, you foolish girl. What do you think you're going to do with your life? Stay here depending on our charity until you're old. The Colonel is offering you a future. Love is something that comes with time, with respect, with living together." Cecilia had tried to argue, but it was useless. Over the next 3 months, the wedding was arranged like a cattle auction. The date was set for the end of March. The dress was being stitched by the best seamstress in town. Reverend Dominic was already notified. Invitations were being distributed. And Cecilia felt increasingly trapped, increasingly suffocated, like a wildflower they were trying to force to bloom in a jar that was sealed too tight. It was her cousin Agnes who planted the first seed of rebellion. Agnes was the daughter of Aunt Margaret's younger sister, lived in Cheyenne, and had come to spend a week in Blackwood Creek right around the time of the engagement. Agnes was 23, married to a textile merchant, and had that light in her eyes of someone who knows the world beyond the town's fences. She and Cecilia became fast friends, talking late into the night in the room they shared. On one of those nights, Cecilia had vented. "Agnes, I can't take it anymore," she whispered in the dark. "Every time I see the Colonel, I feel like running. He looks at me in a way that gives me the creeps. And it's not just that. It's as if there's something wrong, something I can't understand, but my body knows." Her cousin had remained silent for a long time before responding. "Cecilia, have you thought about not marrying, about running away?" The word had sounded impossible and liberating at the same time. Run away. As if it were simple, as if the world out there welcomed solitary women with open arms. Cecilia had laughed bitterly. "Run away to where, Agnes? I have nothing. I know no one. I have no money." Her cousin had turned in bed, eyes shining in the gloom. "You have me. If you run, you can come to Cheyenne. Stay at my house until you get settled. My husband is a good man, he'll understand. You can work as a teacher. I know you read and write well. It's a hard life, but it's your life, not the Colonel's." The idea had been planted like a seed in the fertile soil of desperation. For 2 weeks Cecilia had ruminated on that possibility. Run, disobey, choose, words that seemed forbidden to women of her station. But the closer the wedding got, the more Cecilia felt that she would either run or die inside. And it wouldn't be a quick death. It would be that slow death of someone who fades away piece by piece until nothing remains of the person they were. The decision had been made on an afternoon when the Colonel had come to dine at her uncle's house. Cecilia was sitting at the table serving the beef stew when she felt his hand rest on her waist. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a touch of ownership, of someone marking territory. The Colonel had said something about how she would be a good wife, obedient and skilled, and had laughed in that way that made the air feel heavy. That night, after he left, Cecilia had written a short letter to Agnes. "I'm running on the next new moon. Wait for me." The reply had come a week later, a single line written in hurried script. "I will wait. Be strong." And Cecilia had begun to prepare. She had gathered the few savings she had, coins saved from birthday gifts over the years. She had set aside simple clothes, ones that wouldn't draw attention. She had studied the route to Cheyenne. It was a 3-day journey on foot, following the old wagon road that cut through the woods. She had chosen the date, March 15th, 3 days before the wedding, when the moon would be hidden and the chances of being seen would be lower. But Cecilia hadn't counted on the storm. On the night chosen for the escape, she had woken at 2 in the morning, her heart beating like a war drum. The house was silent, her aunt and uncle asleep in the room across the hall. Cecilia had dressed in the dark, grabbed the small bundle she had hidden under the bed, and had climbed out the back window, the one that squeaked but never woke anyone. The air outside was charged, dense, with that smell of ozone and dirt that precedes a heavy downpour. Cecilia had felt the first drop on her face when she was already 100 yards from the house, following the trail that led to the main road. Then came more drops, thick, heavy. In a matter of minutes, the sky had opened up as if someone had torn a giant floodgate. A violent, furious rain, the kind that turns the ground into mud and erases any track. Cecilia had tried to continue, but it was impossible to see the trail. The darkness was total. There was no moon, no stars, only the relentless rain and the lightning that illuminated the world for fractions of a second before plunging everything back into pitch black. She was soaked to the bone in less than 5 minutes. The bundle of clothes became heavy as a stone. Water seeped into her boots, making every step a struggle against the mud that sucked at her feet. Fear had started as a tingling at the nape of her neck, and had grown until it became panic. Cecilia realized she had lost the trail. The trees around her all looked the same, the lightning showing only dense woods in every direction. She tried to go back, to retrace her steps, but she no longer knew where she had come from. The wind howled through the branches, sounding like a wounded creature. The rain fell with such force it hurt her skin. Cecilia began to scream for help, but her voice was lost in the roar of the storm. She tripped over a root, fell to her knees in the mud, got up, fell again. Her hands were scratched, bleeding. Her whole body trembled, not just from cold, but from pure terror. She was completely lost, in the middle of nowhere, on a night that seemed to have no end. The idea that she might die there alone, without anyone ever knowing what had happened, began to settle in her mind as an inevitable certainty. That was when she saw the light. At first, she thought it was lightning, but it wasn't. It was lamplight, weak, flickering, coming from somewhere to the left. Cecilia dragged herself in that direction, stumbling, falling, getting up. The light grew stronger, and then she saw the silhouette. A man, old, holding a lantern with one hand and making urgent gestures with the other. He was shouting something, but the noise of the rain swallowed the words. Cecilia approached, staggering, and that was when she finally managed to hear. "Come with me before it's too late," the man was screaming, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Come with me before it's too late." There was an urgency in those words that went far beyond the danger of the storm. It was an urgency that carried the weight of years, of secrets, of things that needed to be said before time ran out. Cecilia hesitated for a second. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if she could trust him, but the alternative was freezing to death there in the woods, and at least his voice, though urgent, didn't sound threatening. It sounded desperate, yes, but in a way that seemed more like a plea than an order. She took a step toward him, and the man extended his free hand. "Quick, girl," he shouted. "I know who you are. I know why you're running, but now is not the time for explanations. Come with me or you'll die out here." Those words made Cecilia's blood run colder than the rain. He knew who she was. He knew she was running away. How? Panic returned, but the man had already grabbed her arm and was pulling, not with violence, but with the firmness of someone who has no time to waste. "Move, girl, for the memory of your mother. Move!" The mention of her mother was like an electric shock. Cecilia let him pull her, understanding nothing, unable to think clearly. They walked for a time that seemed eternal, but was probably only 15 minutes. The man knew the woods. Even in the darkness and rain, he moved with certainty, dodging trees, skirting rocks, climbing a steep trail Cecilia had never seen. The lanterns swung, creating dancing shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. Cecilia stumbled constantly, but the man held her arm with surprising strength for someone who looked so old. Finally, a structure emerged in front of them. It was a small cabin, made of dark timber and stone, half hidden among massive pines, high up on a hill. Light leaked through the cracks in the door. The man pushed the door with his shoulder and practically threw Cecilia inside before entering behind her and shutting everything out, locking it with a thick crossbar. The silence was deafening. Or rather, it wasn't quite silence, because the rain still drummed on the roof with fury, but compared to the noise outside, it seemed like the silence of a church. Cecilia stood in the middle of the cabin, dripping water, shivering, her teeth chattering. The place was simple but clean, a narrow cot in a corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, a wood stove with a low fire, shelves with dry goods. It smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. The man placed the lantern on the table, and finally Cecilia could see him properly. He was old, very old, must have been in his early 60s or 70. A face marked by deep wrinkles, hair grey, almost to white, dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets. He was thin, but not frail. He still had that frame of someone who was strong in his youth. He wore simple, worn clothes, Western range gear, and was almost as soaked as she was. "Get those wet clothes off," he said with a voice that had become calmer now that they were sheltered. "There's a blanket there on the cot. Wrap yourself in it. I'm going to make hot tea. You're too cold." Cecilia didn't move, just looked at him with suspicion and fear. "Who are you? How do you know my name? Why did you bring me here?" The questions came out all at once, tumbling over each other. The man sighed deeply, wiped a hand over his wet face. "My name is Tobias Fletcher," he said. "I knew your mother, Amelia, and I knew your father, Anthony. I knew him too well. And there are things you need to know before your wedding, things that will change everything you think you know about your life. That's why I brought you here. That's why I said it was late, because after tomorrow it will be too late for the truth." Cecilia felt her legs give way. She sat in one of the chairs, still shivering, still soaked, but unable to think of anything other than those words. "What truth?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "What truth are you talking about?" Tobias didn't answer immediately. He went to the stove, put water on to boil, took dried herbs from the shelf. His movements were slow, deliberate, like someone buying time to choose the right words. "Your father didn't die of a heart condition," he said finally, his back to her. "He was murdered, and the man who ordered him killed is the same man you are going to marry in 3 days, Colonel Augustus Vance." The world stopped. Cecilia heard the words, but they didn't make sense, as if they were in a foreign tongue. Murdered. Colonel. Lies. It had to be a lie. Some kind of trick of madness. "You're lying," she said with a voice that didn't sound like her own. "My father died of his heart. My uncle told me. Everyone knows. You're crazy, that's it. You brought me here to scare me, but—" Tobias turned around, and in his eyes Cecilia saw something that cut her words in half. It wasn't madness. It was pain. Ancient, deep pain. The kind that becomes part of a person. "I ain't lying, girl," he said with a tired voice. "I wish I was. I wish everything was just like they told you. But it ain't. And I know because I was there. I saw it. And worse than that," he paused, swallowed hard, "I helped." The silence that followed was as dense as the storm outside. Cecilia looked at that old man and saw guilt stamped in every line of his face. She saw truth too, a truth she didn't want to believe, but her body, her instinct, was already accepting before her mind could process it. Tobias had turned back to the stove, his hands trembling as he poured hot water over the herbs. "I worked for the colonel back in those days," he began, his voice low. "I was his enforcer, one of his trusted men. I did what he said, no questions asked. Your father, Anthony, owned land that bordered the Colonel's. Good land, with plenty of water, rich soil. The Colonel wanted that land, offered to buy it several times, but your pa wouldn't sell. Said he was going to leave it for his children, for you who were about to be born." Tobias brought 2 tin mugs of tea, placed one in front of Cecilia. She didn't touch it, just kept looking at him, paralyzed. The man sat in the other chair, holding his mug with both hands, as if he needed the heat to keep talking. "The Colonel got obsessed," he continued. "Started spreading rumors about your father, saying he had debts, that he was going bust, that the land was going to auction. None of it was true, but the Colonel has a way of making lies turn into truth when he wants. Your father resisted, proved he didn't have a nickel of debt. So the Colonel decided to settle it another way." Tobias's voice cracked. He took a sip of tea, coughed. "It was in June of 1870, 2 days before you were born. The Colonel sent me and 2 other men to your father's house. Said it was just to scare him, to make him sign the deed. But when we got there, your pa fought back, pulled a shotgun, said he was going to the marshal, that he had proof of all the lies. That was when—" Tobias couldn't finish the sentence. Cecilia felt something rising in her throat, something between nausea and a scream. "When what? When they killed him?" Her voice was shrill now, hysterical. "Was that it?" Tobias nodded slowly, eyes closed as if he couldn't bear to see her reaction. "One of the men fired. Wasn't me who pulled the trigger, but that don't absolve me of nothing. I was there. I helped carry the body. I helped bury him in a deep grave on his own land. And afterward, I helped the Colonel forge documents saying your father had debts and that he had sold the land before he died." The words fell like stones, each heavier than the last. Cecilia was crying now, tears mixed with the rain that still dripped from her hair. "This can't be true," she repeated like a mantra. "My uncle, my mother, everyone said it was sickness. Everyone." "Your mother never knew," Tobias interrupted. "Nobody knew. The Colonel told her your father had a heart attack, that it was quick, no pain. Showed a body all cleaned up, no marks. He's real good at hiding what he does, girl. Real good at making everything look legal, proper. Your mother believed it because she had no reason to doubt. She was a widow, pregnant, desperate. When the Colonel offered to buy the land back, she thought it was a blessing. She didn't know the land was already his on paper, that the deeds were already forged." Cecilia felt as if the floor were opening beneath her. Her whole life, her whole history, everything she thought she knew, was a lie, built on crime, on blood, on stolen land. "And my mother?" she asked with a voice almost inaudible. "Did she find out? Was that why she died?" Tobias's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," he whispered. "She found out 9 years later. I never knew how, but she found out. She came to me, confronted me. I denied it, but she knew. She threatened to go to the authorities, to expose everything. A week later she was dead. Sudden fever, they said. But I know it wasn't no fever. The Colonel leaves no loose ends." The horror was such that Cecilia couldn't cry anymore. She just sat there, staring into the void, processing the fact that the man who killed her parents was the same man she was going to marry, the same man who smiled at her, who touched her waist, who spoke of a future. The nausea finally came, violent. Cecilia got up stumbling, ran to a corner of the cabin and vomited, her whole body shaking. Tobias waited for her to finish before he continued speaking. "I kept the real documents," he said softly. "The original deeds, the papers proving the land belonged to your father, a letter he had written to the authorities denouncing the Colonel's threats. I kept everything these years, waiting for the right moment. Thought about burning them 1,000 times, about forgetting, but I couldn't. It was like your pa and ma were watching me, demanding justice, Cecilia went back to the chair, picked up the mug of tea with hands that shook so much half the liquid spilled. She drank the rest in one gulp, feeling the heat go down and calm her turning stomach a little. "Why did you tell me this now?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me before, years ago, when I was still a child?" Tobias sighed. "Because you were a child. What difference would it make? You'd just carry a weight that wasn't yours. And because I'm a coward," he admitted with brutal honesty, "I spent years trying to forget, trying to live with the guilt, hiding up here on this mountain, far from everything and everyone. But when I heard you were going to marry him," Tobias continued, "I knew I couldn't stay quiet no more. Because the Colonel ain't offering you a marriage, girl. He's closing the circle. You are the last Andrews. If he marries you, officially, legally, there won't be anyone left to claim the land. It'll be a complete erasure of your family. And after you marry, after you have heirs with his name, you'll be disposable, just like your mother was." The revelation fell like a final sentence. Cecilia understood then the urgency in Tobias's voice out in the woods. Before it's too late for justice, too late for truth, too late to stop the cycle from completing. She looked at that old, guilty man, broken by his own conscience, and felt anger and gratitude at the same time. Anger for him having participated in her parents' death. Gratitude for him having kept the truth all these years and now offering a chance to do something with it. "You said you have documents," Cecilia said, and for the first time since she had entered the cabin, her voice sounded steady. "Can I see them?" Tobias nodded, stood up with difficulty. He went to a corner of the cabin, knelt, pried up a floorboard. From underneath he pulled a rusted metal box locked with a padlock. He opened it with a key he took from a string around his neck. Inside, papers yellowed by time, carefully folded and protected with oilcloth. He brought the box to the table, placed it in front of Cecilia. "It's all here," he said. "Original deed to the land in Anthony Andrews' name. Forged documents the Colonel presented saying your father had sold everything. Letter your father wrote to the circuit judge reporting the Colonel's threats. And this," he pulled out a separate envelope, "is my written testimony, confessing everything I saw, everything I did, with my signature notarized in secret." Cecilia took the papers with hands that no longer trembled so much. She read slowly, every word confirming the horror Tobias had described. She saw her father's signature in a firm, beautiful script, saw the different handwriting on the forged documents, saw the complaint he never had time to deliver. And she saw Tobias's testimony, a complete confession of a man who carried guilt like a sentence. "With this, I can destroy him," Cecilia whispered. "I can prove the Colonel is a thief and a murderer. I can get the land back, clear my father's name, get justice for my mother." Tobias nodded. "You can. But there's a problem. The wedding is set for 3 days from now. After you marry, you become his wife, and a wife can't testify against her husband. Besides that, he planned it well. The day after the wedding, there's going to be a burning of old records at the county clerk's office, a cleaning of the archives. The originals that are there, the few that still have traces of the fraud, will turn to ash. It was all arranged with the recorder." The urgency made sense now. It was a race against time. 3 days to decide what to do, how to do it, without being discovered. Cecilia looked at the storm outside through the cracks in the shutter. "So I need to go to the authorities before the wedding," she said, thinking aloud. "I need to take these documents to the judge, make a formal complaint." She looked at Tobias. "Will you go with me? Will you testify?" The expression on the old man's face was that of someone who already knew he had signed his own death warrant. "I will," he said without hesitation. "It's the least I can do. I ain't got much time left living with this guilt eating me from the inside. At least I'll die doing something right." Cecilia felt something stir in her chest, something akin to respect for this man who had helped destroy her family, but was now willing to destroy himself to fix it. The storm outside began to subside. The rain still fell, but it no longer had that violent fury of before. Cecilia looked at her own soaked clothes, at the simple cabin, at the documents scattered on the table, at the old man who had kept dangerous truths for nearly 20 years. And she felt for the first time since she had decided to run from the wedding that maybe it wasn't just an escape, maybe it was a fight. "Tomorrow morning we go," she said with a determination that surprised herself. "When it breaks light, we head for town. We find the judge. We hand everything over." "Before it's too late," she repeated Tobias's words, but now with a different meaning. "Before the colonel erases all the tracks. Before he wins completely." Tobias smiled, but it was a sad smile, of someone who knows the price of justice is high. "You have your mother's courage," he said, "and your father's stubbornness. They'd be proud of you." Cecilia felt fresh tears, but different from the previous ones. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of something she hadn't had in a long time, purpose. She finally took off the wet clothes, wrapped herself in the thick blanket Tobias offered, sat near the stove. The heat of the fire began to melt the ice that had settled in her bones. Tobias heated more tea, made a simple cornmeal mush, placed it in front of her. "Eat," he ordered gently. "You're going to need strength." Cecilia ate slowly, every spoonful helping to stabilize a body that had gone through trauma after trauma that night. While she ate, Tobias told more details. About what it was like, leaving the colonel's employ years ago, about how he built this cabin in the most isolated spot he could find, about how he lived off hunting and a small patch of crops, avoiding contact with town, about how he had grown old alone, consumed by remorse that didn't diminish with time. But there was one thing he said that made Cecilia stop eating and look at him with renewed attention. "Your mother, Amelia, was a special woman," Tobias said with a soft voice full of memory. "She wasn't just smart, wasn't just strong. She had a rare kindness. When I was sick, right after I left the colonel's work, she found me accidentally on the road, feverish, near dying. She didn't know me from Adam, but she took me into her house, treated me, gave me medicine, food, took care of me for 3 days until I got better." Cecilia felt something tighten in her chest. No one had ever told her this. "My mother helped you?" Tobias nodded. "She did. And when I got better and left, she asked for nothing in return. Just said she hoped I used the second chance God gave me to do good things. I never forgot those words, girl. I carry them to this day. And it was because of them that I didn't burn the documents. It was because of them that I'm here now telling you all this." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was a silence of understanding, of a circle closing in a way that made sense. Cecilia's mother had saved Tobias without knowing who he was, without knowing he had participated in her husband's death. And now, years later, Tobias was trying to save her daughter, trying to honor the kindness he didn't deserve but had received nonetheless. The night wore on. The storm diminished until it became just a fine drizzle. Tobias offered the cot to Cecilia, said he would sleep in the chair, but she refused. She shared the bed with him, each in a corner, separated by respect and circumstance. Neither of them slept well. Cecilia lay staring at the dark wooden ceiling, processing everything she had discovered, planning what to do, feeling fear and anger and determination mixing in proportions that changed every minute. When the first grey light began to enter through the cracks in the window, Cecilia got up. Her clothes were still damp, but they would do. She dressed, tied back her hair, took the documents Tobias had put back in the metal box. She was ready. Tobias also rose, stiff and tired, but with a determination in his eyes that he didn't have the night before. They left the cabin as soon as it was light enough to see the trail. The woods were washed by the rain, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. Birds were starting to sing. The world seemed renewed, clean, in total contrast to the filth they were about to expose. Cecilia looked back one last time, saw the small cabin that had been a refuge in the storm and had become a place of revelation. But there was something she didn't know, something Tobias hadn't told her yet because he hadn't had time, because the night had been too short for all the truths. The colonel already knew she had run. Her aunt and uncle had woken up, had seen the open window, had sent word. And the colonel, a man who left nothing to chance, had already sent men to look. Men who knew the woods, who knew how to track, who had clear orders to bring Cecilia back at any cost. And those men were closer than Cecilia and Tobias imagined. They had walked only 20 minutes when Tobias stopped suddenly, hand raised, asking for silence. Cecilia froze, heart racing. The old man had his head cocked, listening to something she couldn't yet hear. After a few eternal seconds, he whispered without looking back. "There's folks following us, horses, at least 3. The fear returned like an icy wave. Cecilia clutched the metal box against her chest. "Is it the colonel's men?" Tobias nodded slowly, eyes scanning the surrounding woods for options. "Has to be. Your uncle must have found out you ran, warned the colonel, and he sent people after you." He finally turned to look at Cecilia, and there was a new urgency in that lined face. "We ain't going to make it to town on the main road. They're faster. They'll catch us in less than an hour." "So what do we do?" Cecilia's voice came out higher than she wanted, betraying the panic starting to take over. Tobias thought fast, eyes moving as if calculating distances and possibilities. "There's another way," he said. "Longer, harder, goes through the thick brush, down through a canyon horses can't cross. If we go that way, they'll have to go around, buy us about 3-4 hours, enough time to get to town and find help." Cecilia didn't hesitate. "Then let's go that way." Tobias was already moving, leaving the trail, entering the dense vegetation. Cecilia followed him, trying not to make noise, but every twig that snapped under her feet sounded loud as a gunshot in the morning quiet. Behind them, distant but getting closer, came the sound confirming their worst fears. Voices of men, hooves of horses striking wet earth, orders being shouted. They quickened their pace. Tobias moved with surprising agility for his age, dodging vines, jumping over roots, choosing the path with the precision of someone who knew every tree. Cecilia tried to keep up, but her wet skirts got in the way, caught on bushes, made her trip. Sweat began to mix with the dampness of her clothes, still wet from the night before. The metal box weighed heavier and heavier in her arms. After about 15 minutes of forced marching, they arrived at a rocky ridge. The ground disappeared into a steep descent, almost vertical, covered in loose stones and creeping vegetation. Down below, way down below, ran a creek that shone under the growing morning light. Tobias pointed. "It's down there. Have to go slow, hold on to the rocks and roots. It's dangerous, but it's our only way." Cecilia looked at that impossible descent and felt vertigo. She had never done anything like this. She had spent her whole life between her uncle's house and the town, on flat, safe paths. But she had no choice. Behind them, the voices were closer. She distinctly heard someone yell, "The track goes that way! Follow the prince!" Tobias was already starting the descent, grabbing a thick root, testing the hold before putting his weight on it. "Come on, girl," he said, looking up. "I'll go first, guide you where to step. Just don't look down." Cecilia took a deep breath, tucked the box inside the bundle she still carried on her back, tied it tight, and began to climb down. It was a descent that seemed to last hours, but probably took 20 minutes. Every movement had to be calculated, every hold tested. Cecilia slipped twice, managed to catch herself at the last second, heart in her mouth, hands scratched and bleeding. Tobias went ahead, indicating the firmest rocks, the most reliable routes, speaking low the whole time. "That's it. Now put your foot there. Hold that rock. Easy. No rush." When they finally reached the bottom, Both fell to their knees on the bank of the creek, breathing heavy, legs trembling from the effort. Cecilia looked up and saw how steep the descent had been. No horse could pass there, maybe not even men without ropes. They had bought precious time, but they couldn't stop. Tobias was already getting up, splashing his face in the cold creek water. "We follow the bank till we find the old bridge," he explained. "From there, just climb up again, and we come out near town, on the opposite side of where they'll be looking." Cecilia nodded, scooped water in her hands, drank, felt the cold going down and invigorating her exhausted body a little. They followed the creek, jumping from stone to stone, wetting their feet in the shallow water, always alert for any sound indicating pursuit. The sun was already high when they reached the old bridge Tobias had mentioned. It was a rotting wooden structure, half collapsed, spanning the creek at a point where it was wider and deeper. Cecilia looked with distrust. "Will that hold us?" Tobias tested the first plank with his foot. It creaked but didn't break. "It'll hold if we go one at a time, slow." He went first, every step making the bridge groan in protest. He reached the other side, waved to Cecilia. "Now you. Come careful." Cecilia took the first step, felt the wood give a little, held onto the side where there was still a remnant of a handrail. Another step. Another. She was almost in the middle when she heard the snap. The plank under her left foot broke. Cecilia screamed, lost her balance, fell to her knees. Her leg went through the hole that opened up, the water rushing down below. Tobias shouted her name, was already coming back. "Don't move! I've got you!" Cecilia was frozen with fear, clutching what was left of the rail, feeling the whole bridge sway. The bundle with the documents slipped from her back, hung by one strap on her shoulder. Tobias arrived, extended his hand. "Give me your hand. Let's get your leg out. Easy." Cecilia grabbed his hand with desperate strength. He pulled, helped her get her leg out of the hole to stand up. The bridge complained with horrible creaks, but held. They finished the crossing almost running, jumped to firm ground on the other side, and only then allowed themselves to breathe in relief. "Not far now," Tobias said, but Cecilia saw he was tired. His face had gone pale, his breathing was difficult, irregular. The old man put a hand to his chest, grimaced in pain. "Are you okay?" Cecilia asked, concern overriding her own fear. Tobias nodded yes, but it was an obvious lie. "Just the old ticker complaining," he said, trying to smile. "I'll be fine. Let's keep going." They climbed again, this time a gentler slope, through an old trail someone had used long ago, but was now almost taken over by brush. When they reached the top, Cecilia recognized where they were. They could see the town in the distance, the red shingle roofs, the church with the cross on top, the central square. They were safe. Almost. "We go straight to Judge Theobald Mason's house," Tobias said. "He's an honest man. At least he was when I lived here. If he still is, he'll listen to us. He'll look at the papers." Cecilia walked beside him, both walking now on known ground, along paths that led to the back of the town. It was almost noon when they entered through the back streets, avoiding the main square. "I want to take a quick pause to ask you something. If this story is moving you, leave your like. It helps other people find these stories of courage and truth. And now come back with me because the most important part is yet to come." Judge Theobald Mason's house was on a quiet street, a large two-story house, painted white with blue trim. It had a wrought-iron gate and a well-kept garden. Tobias knocked on the door, his hand trembling visibly now. It took a while before someone answered. It was a young maid who looked with suspicion at those two dirty, wet visitors, looking like they had spent the night in the wild. "We need to speak with the judge," Tobias said with a firm voice, despite the exhaustion. "It's urgent. Matter of justice." The girl hesitated, but something in his tone convinced her. "Wait here." She closed the door, leaving them on the porch. Cecilia took the chance to check the documents, see if they were intact after all the falls and running. They were crumpled, stained with damp, but legible. That was all that mattered. The door opened again. This time it was a man of about 50, tall, greying hair, reading glasses hanging on a chain. He wore casual clothes for being at home, but carried an air of authority. Judge Theobald looked at Tobias, eyes widening in recognition. "Tobias Fletcher? I thought you were dead. How many years has it been since anyone's seen you?" 15 years, Judge," Tobias replied. "And I almost died indeed several times. But today I'm here because there's an injustice needs fixing before it's too late. And this young lady here," he pointed to Cecilia, "is the one who suffered most from this injustice, even though she didn't even know it till yesterday." Judge Theobald looked from one to the other, expression changing from surprise to seriousness. "Come in. Let's talk inside." He led them to a study lined with books, with a heavy desk full of organized papers. He offered chairs, sat behind the desk, clasped his hands waiting. "Speak." It was Tobias who began to tell. He spoke slowly, methodically, starting from the beginning. Of the work he did for Colonel Vance, the orders he received, the night in June 1870 when they went to Anthony Andrews's house. He described the murder with details that made Cecilia close her eyes in pain, described how they buried the body, how they forged the documents, how they deceived the widow. Described Amelia's death 9 years later when she discovered the truth. Judge Theobald listened without interrupting, but his face grew darker and darker. When Tobias finished, the silence was thick. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice heavy. "These are grave accusations, Tobias. Very grave. Do you have proof of what you're saying?" Tobias signaled to Cecilia, who placed the metal box on the desk, opened it, spread out the documents. The judge took each paper with care, read with the attention of someone who knows what they are looking for. Examined the original deeds, compared them with the forged documents, read the letter Anthony Andrews had written reporting the threats. Read Tobias's written testimony, notarized in a neighboring town. The more he read, the harder his face became. After nearly an hour of silence, broken only by the turning of pages, Judge Theobald took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief, put them back on. "This is enough to open a criminal investigation against Colonel Vance," he said. "Murder, forgery, illegal appropriation of property. And if proven he had involvement in Amelia's death, that would be a second murder." He looked at Cecilia. "The land is yours by right, child. Always was." He looked at Tobias. "And you will have to answer too as an accomplice. You know that." "I know," Tobias replied with the calm of someone who had already made peace with fate. "And I'm prepared. I just want justice done before I die. Whatever happens to me after is what I deserve." The judge nodded with respect. "Your confession will weigh in your favor, but it won't save you from consequences." Tobias agreed. "I don't expect to be free, Judge. I just expect to be right." Theobald stood up, began to pace the study, hands behind his back, thinking. "The problem is, Colonel Vance has enormous influence in this region," he said thoughtfully. "He has friends in high places, money to buy witnesses, power to make documents disappear. If I simply order his arrest based on this, he'll find a way to reverse it. I need more." Cecilia felt her heart sink. "More? Is this not enough?" The judge looked at her with compassion. "It's enough for me, child. But it's not enough for the system. It'll become your word, and that of a confessed ex-henchman against the word of a respected colonel. A jury will hesitate." He went back to his chair, drummed his fingers on the desk. "Unless we get the original records from the clerk's office that prove the forgery. If I have not just these copies, but also the official ledgers showing the discrepancy, then there's no way for him to squirm out. The documents at the office are going to be burned tomorrow. Tobias said. Right after the wedding, it was all arranged. Judge Theobald frowned. Wedding? What wedding? Cecilia swallowed hard. My wedding to the colonel. It was set for the day after tomorrow, but I ran away last night. That's when I got lost in the storm and found Tobias. The judge's expression changed completely. I see, he said slowly. He was going to marry the daughter of the woman he killed, consolidate the theft of the land forever, and the next day destroy the last evidence. It's a well-thought-out plan, I have to admit. But now that you've run, he knows he's lost control. He'll be desperate. Desperate men with power are extremely dangerous. He already sent men after us, Cecilia said. We heard them in the woods. That's why we had to come down the canyon, go around. Judge Theobald stood up again, went to the window, looked at the street. They don't know you're here. Cecilia and Tobias shook their heads. We came through the back of town. No one saw us. Good, said the judge. I'm sending my son to fetch Sheriff Campbell. He's a trustworthy man. He'll help us. And I'll send someone to the clerk's office to get the original records before it's too late. He pulled a cord that rang a bell elsewhere in the house. The same maid from before appeared. Get Joachim, the judge ordered. Quick! In less than 2 minutes, a young man of about 20 appeared, strong, bright-eyed. Joachim, I need you to go to the station, said his father. Ask Sheriff Campbell to come here immediately. Say it's urgent, life or death matter, and mention it to no one. Understood? No one can know. The young man nodded and left, almost running. Then the judge turned to the maid. Maria, prepare coffee and food for our guests, and water for them to wash up. Maria looked again at Cecilia and Tobias, this time with less suspicion and more pity, and left to fulfill the orders. You stay here until we resolve this, said the judge. It's the safest place. My house has a locked gate, loyal servants, and if needed, I have guns to defend us. Cecilia felt tears of relief. For the first time since the night before, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. Tobias was leaning back in the chair, hands still on his chest, breathing still irregular. The judge noticed. You sick, Tobias? Need a doctor? The old man shook his head. Won't do no good, Judge. Old heart can't be fixed. Just need to last a few more days till I see this settled. After that, whatever comes, comes. Maria returned with a tray, hot coffee, bread, cheese, fruit. Cecilia realized she hadn't eaten anything substantial since the mush the night before, and her stomach growled loud. She and Tobias ate in silence while the judge reread the documents, taking notes, preparing the case. Sheriff Campbell arrived half an hour later. He was a younger man, about 35, lean, thin mustache, penetrating gaze. He entered the study already alert, hand near the gun in his holster. Theobald, what's this emergency? Judge Theobald signaled for him to sit and repeated the whole story, showing the documents. The sheriff listened with growing attention, expression passing from skepticism to shock to anger. When the judge finished, Sheriff Campbell let out a low curse. Excuse the language, he said, looking at Cecilia, but if this is true, and by the papers it looks to be, the colonel is a dangerous criminal who fooled everyone for almost 20 years. He looked at Tobias. And you were part of it. Tobias didn't look away. I was, and I'm ready to pay. But first help us catch the man who gave the orders, who planned it all. The sheriff nodded. I'll need to seize the records from the clerk's office to compare with what you have here, he said, thinking aloud. If they match, if they prove the forgery, I can arrest the colonel today. But there's a problem. The current clerk, Mr. Gaston, is a close friend of the colonel. If I show up there asking for old documents, he'll get suspicious, he'll tip him off. We need another way, Judge Theobald thought. Reverend Dominic, he said suddenly. He has access to the church records, which include copies of land transactions for inventory purposes, and he's a man of integrity, doesn't bow to the colonel. If we get the church records first, it can serve as additional proof. The sheriff agreed. Good idea. I'll go there now. But before he could stand up, they heard noise outside. Horses, voices, loud banging on the gate. Everyone froze. The judge went to the window carefully, peeked through the curtain, came back pale-faced. It's the colonel. He's at the gate with about 6 armed men. He knows you're here. The world seemed to stop. Cecilia felt the fear returning, cold and paralyzing. How did he find out? Joachim, the judge's son, appeared at the study door, breathless. Pa, the colonel is demanding you hand over the girl. Says she's his fiancée, that she ran off, that he has the right to take her back. Folks are gathering in the street, curious to see what's happening. Judge Theobald straightened up, and for the first time Cecilia saw in him not just the authority of office, but personal courage. Tell the colonel the girl is under the protection of the court, he said with a firm voice, and that if he tries to enter by force, he'll answer for home invasion and assault on an authority. Joachim hesitated. Pa, he has 6 men with guns. We just have me, you, and maybe Maria with a frying pan. The judge almost smiled. We have the sheriff too, and we have right on our side. That counts more than guns. Sheriff Campbell was already standing, checking his weapon. I'll go out there and talk to him, he said. Meanwhile, Theobald, you take these documents, put them in a safe place. If something happens to me, you ensure this gets into the right hands. The judge nodded, began gathering the papers, but Cecilia stood up, her voice coming out steady despite the fear corroding her insides. No, I'm going with you, Sheriff. I'm going to face the colonel. He needs to know I know the truth, that he won't get away with it this time. Tobias tried to protest. Girl, it ain't safe. But Cecilia was already walking toward the door. My mother faced him when she found out the truth, she said without looking back. She didn't have anyone to protect her, but I do. The time has come for him to answer. The sheriff looked at her with new respect. You got grit, miss. Come on then, but stay behind me, and if I tell you to get back inside, you get back. Understood? Cecilia nodded. The two left the study, crossed the house, reached the iron gate that was still locked. On the other side, mounted on an imposing black horse, was Colonel Augustus Vance. Cecilia had never really looked at him before. She had always averted her eyes, uncomfortable for reasons she didn't understand. But now she looked, saw a tall man, broad shoulders, dark hair with grey at the temples, a face that could be handsome if not for the hardness in the eyes, for the subtle cruelty in the way his lip curled. He wore expensive riding clothes, polished leather boots, wide-brimmed hat, had a whip hanging from the saddle and a revolver in his holster. When he saw Cecilia, his eyes narrowed. Cecilia, he said with a voice trying to be paternal but sounding possessive. What madness was this running away, girl? You worried me. Your aunt and uncle and I were desperate. Come, let's go home. Let's settle this as family. No need to involve the authorities in a misunderstanding between sweethearts. His voice was reasonable, almost gentle, but Cecilia heard the threat beneath the words. The sheriff stepped forward. Colonel, Miss Cecilia is here of her own free will, under protection of the law. She ain't going with you. The colonel didn't even look at the sheriff, kept his eyes fixed on Cecilia. Is that right, girl? You going to believe strangers instead of coming back to your family? To the man who's going to give you a future, security, a respected name? It was then that Cecilia found her voice, and it was a voice she didn't know she had, a voice coming from a deep place where the anger of 19 years of lies lived. I know what you did, she said, every word clear as a bell. I know you killed my father. I know you stole our land. I know you killed my mother when she found out. I know everything, and you won't get away with it this time. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the curious onlookers gathered in the street stopped whispering. The colonel's face didn't change expression, but something in his eyes altered, became cold, calculating, dangerous. You're delirious, girl, he said with a low, controlled voice. Grief and exhaustion are making you believe in lies. But Cecilia saw he was worried, saw when his eyes searched behind her, seeking confirmation of how much she knew, of who had told her. Tobias appeared in the doorway of the house at that moment, stumbling a bit but steady enough. "She ain't delirious, Colonel," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told her everything. Told her about June 1870, about Anthony Andrews, about the order you gave, about where the body is buried." The Colonel's face finally changed, went white, then red, veins popping in his neck. "You!" he spat with pure hate. "I should have killed you when I had the chance." Tobias smiled without joy. "Should have, but you didn't. And now I'm going to testify against you, going to tell everything I saw, everything I did under your orders. And these documents here," he tapped his pocket, "prove you're a thief and a murderer." The Colonel pulled his revolver with surprising speed, leveled it at Tobias. The sheriff reacted just as fast, drawing his own weapon, aiming at the Colonel. "Drop the gun, Vance, now!" The Colonel's men also drew weapons, creating a standoff where any wrong move could turn into a bloodbath. The crowd backed away, frightened. Someone yelled to call for more help. It was Judge Theobald who broke the deadlock. He walked out of the house with deliberate calm, unarmed, only a leather satchel under his arm. "Augustus," he said with a voice of authority, "you are surrounded by witnesses. Any violence you commit here will only add more crimes to the list. If you are innocent as you claim, you will have the chance to defend yourself in a fair trial, but if you shoot now, you prove your guilt to all these people." The Colonel was calculating. Cecilia could see it in his eyes. Calculating if he could kill Tobias, grab Cecilia, and flee before the sheriff or anyone else reacted. Calculating if his men were loyal enough to start a shootout against authorities. Calculating if there was still a way to control the situation. And Cecilia saw the exact moment he realized he couldn't. The Colonel lowered the gun slowly, but the expression on his face was a promise of vengeance. "All right, Judge," he said with a voice of ice. "Let's settle this legally. But you will discover you are making a grave mistake accusing an innocent man based on the words of a confessed criminal and the delusions of a hysterical girl. My lawyers will prove my innocence." He pulled the reins of his horse, began to turn away. That was when Tobias stumbled, brought his hand to his chest, fell to his knees. Cecilia ran to him, caught him before he fell completely. "Tobias!" The old man was pale, sweating cold, breath coming in short gasps. "The heart," he whispered. "Can't take no more. Cecilia, listen." He grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "The documents are safe. You will succeed. We'll get justice. For your pa, for your ma. Go." The sentence went unfinished. Tobias Fletcher, a man who had lived 15 years with guilt as a constant companion, a man who had kept dangerous secrets waiting for the right moment, a man who had been saved by the kindness of a woman and now tried to honor that kindness by saving her daughter, closed his eyes and opened them no more. Cecilia held his body, feeling the life slip through her fingers. "No," she whispered, "not like this. You need to testify, need to tell everything." But Tobias was gone, taking with him the last words Cecilia would never know. Sheriff Campbell approached, put fingers to the old man's neck, confirmed. "He's gone." From the gate came a low, cruel laugh. The Colonel was still there, watching the scene. "How convenient," he said with venomous sarcasm. "Your only witness died. Now only you are left, hysterical girl with documents anyone could have forged, and a judge and a sheriff who will have to explain why they believed this farce. Good luck proving anything." He spurred his horse, rode off with his men following behind, leaving a cloud of dust. Cecilia continued holding Tobias, tears flowing silently. The man had redeemed himself in the end, had died trying to fix the mistake he made almost 20 years ago, had died protecting her. And now she was alone with the truth, having to prove the improbable, having to face a powerful man with only old paper and the word of a dead man. Judge Theobald knelt beside her. "Cecilia, listen," he said with urgency. He is certain it will be harder without Tobias's oral testimony, but we still have the documents. We still have his written confession notarized. And I am going to the clerk's office right now, going to get the original records before they disappear. We will build a solid case. We won't let him win. Cecilia wiped the tears with the back of her hand, looked at the judge with determination born of pain. Then let's do this right. Let's do it for him, she pointed to Tobias, for my father, for my mother, and for all the other people the colonel hurt and silenced over the years. The judge smiled with approval. That's the attitude. Let's go inside. Let's plan. And tomorrow, we expose everything. But Cecilia didn't know the colonel was also planning, and that his vengeances were famous for being meticulous, cruel, and inevitable. They buried Tobias Fletcher in the town cemetery that same afternoon, before the sun set. It was a simple ceremony, quick, with few people present. Reverend Dominic conducted the prayers with a solemn voice, speaking of redemption and divine mercy. Cecilia stood by the grave, holding a handful of dirt she then threw onto the simple wooden coffin. "Thank you," she whispered so low only she heard. "Thank you for saving me, for saving the truth." Judge Theobald had spent the whole afternoon at the clerk's office, using his authority to demand access to the old records. The clerk, Mr. Gaston, had tried to stall, invent excuses, but couldn't deny a direct court order. When Theobald returned home, it was almost night, and he carried a thick folder full of documents he compared meticulously with the papers Tobias had kept. The discrepancies were glaring. Dates altered, signatures clearly different, records appearing in one book but not another. "It's all here," said the judge, showing Cecilia and Sheriff Campbell, who had stayed at the house for additional protection. "The proof of forgery is undeniable. With Tobias's written testimony, with the original documents he kept, and now with the clerk's records showing the alterations, we have a strong case. Very strong. I can issue an arrest warrant for the colonel tomorrow." Duh! But there was a problem, and Sheriff Campbell was the one who voiced it. "Colonel has a fortified ranch," he said with concern. "High walls, armed men, stock of supplies. If he decides to lock himself in there and resist arrest, it'll turn into a siege. Could take weeks, could be deaths, and in that time he can bribe witnesses, destroy more evidence, even organize an escape to another territory." "Then what do we do?" Cecilia asked, frustration leaking into her voice. "We have the proof, we have the truth, but he can still escape." Judge Theobald drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. "Unless we expose him publicly first," he said slowly. "If we make his crimes known to everyone in town, in the region, if we create social pressure so great he has nowhere to run, then he will have to surrender or flee as a confessed criminal." "How do we do that?" the sheriff asked. The judge had a gleam in his eyes. "Tomorrow is Sunday, 10 o'clock service. Everyone from town and the surrounding ranches comes, including the colonel. He never misses, likes to be seen as a pious man. If we expose everything there in front of everyone, he won't be able to control the narrative. The truth will spread faster than he can smother it." Cecilia felt something lighting up in her chest. "In the church? In front of everyone?" The judge nodded. "Reverend Dominic is our ally. He knew your mother, respected her. If I explain the situation, I'm sure he will allow you to speak." He looked at Cecilia seriously. "But it has to be you, child. Has to be the daughter telling the story of the father and mother. Has to be the victim exposing the tormentor. Only that will have the emotional weight needed to move people's hearts." Fear returned, cold and paralyzing. Speak in front of the whole town, in front of the colonel, in front of the aunt and uncle who had sold her like cattle. "I don't know if I can," Cecilia admitted with a small voice. "I don't know if I'll have the courage." The judge put a hand on her shoulder, a paternal touch. "You ran from home on a stormy night," he said gently, "crossed deep woods, climbed down a canyon, faced pursuit, held the hand of a dying man while he told you terrible truths. You have already shown more courage than most people show in a whole lifetime. Speaking in church is just one more step." Cecilia thought of Tobias, of how his voice had trembled confessing the crimes, but how he had spoken anyway. Thought of her mother, Amelia, who had confronted the colonel knowing the danger, seeking justice even if it cost everything. Thought of her father, Anthony, who had refused to sell his land even under threat because he wanted to leave a legacy for the daughter not yet born. They had all been brave. She couldn't be less. "All right," she said, with a voice that grew steadier with each word. "I will speak. I will tell everything, and may God give me strength not to shake in front of him." The sheriff smiled with approval. "I'll be there armed," he said. "Any suspicious move from the colonel or his men, I intervene. I won't let anything happen to you." The judge nodded too. "And I'll bring the documents. Show them to whoever wants to see. Let's make this Sunday the day the truth finally beats the lie." Cecilia spent the night in the judge's house, in a comfortable guest room, but couldn't sleep. Lay staring at the ceiling, rehearsing mentally what she was going to say, how she would start, what words to use. Thought of all the times she had felt that chill down her spine when the colonel looked at her, and now understood it was instinct, trying to warn of the danger reason hadn't yet identified. Thought of how she had grown up believing she was an orphan through no one's fault, when in truth she was an orphan because of a man who now slept soundly on a ranch built on blood and lies. When the first glare of sun began to enter the window, Cecilia rose, washed her face, combed her hair, put on the most sober dress Maria the maid had lent her. Black, simple, suitable, both for morning and for what she was about to do. Went down to the kitchen where the judge was already drinking coffee, the satchel with documents at his side. "Ready?" he asked. Cecilia nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. Sheriff Campbell arrived early, checked his gun, the revolver in his holster clearly visible. The three left together when it was 15 minutes to 10, walking through the streets of Blackwood Creek toward the church. Some folks saw them and looked away, embarrassed. Others whispered. Everyone already knew something had happened between Cecilia and the colonel, but no one knew exactly what. The church of Blackwood Creek was an old structure, white stone, with a high bell tower and thick wooden doors. The bells were already ringing when they arrived, calling the faithful. The interior was cool and dim, smelling of incense and beeswax. Wooden pews lined each side of the central aisle, leading to the altar where Reverend Dominic was already preparing for the service. Cecilia sat in the last pew, accompanied by the judge and the sheriff. People arrived, filling the church slowly. Cecilia saw her uncle and aunt, Sebastian and Margaret, who entered and froze upon seeing her. Her uncle opened his mouth as if to speak, but her aunt pulled his arm, dragged him to a pew on the other side. There was shame on their faces, or maybe just the discomfort of having been caught selling their niece to a murderer. Other familiar faces arrived. Mrs. Mercedes, the neighbor who had always been kind, Mr. Augustus from the general store, who sold fabric and tools, families of ranchers from the outskirts, simple town folk, restless children, stooped old men, and then, when the church was almost full, he entered. Colonel Augustus Vance walked through the door as if he owned the place. He wore a quality dark suit, hat in hand, polished boots. Two men accompanied him, stayed near the door like guards. The colonel walked down the central aisle, greeting people with nods, smiling that smile that didn't reach his eyes. When he passed the pew where Cecilia was, he looked directly at her, and in that look was pure threat, a silent promise that this was not going to end well for her. Cecilia held his gaze without flinching, even with her heart beating out of rhythm. The colonel continued to the front pew, always his spot, and sat like a king on a throne. The service began. Reverend Dominic conducted the opening prayers, the hymns, the scripture reading. Cecilia barely paid attention, just repeated the responses automatically, her mind focused on what came next. When the moment for the sermon arrived, Reverend Dominic went up to the pulpit, but instead of starting to preach, he looked at the congregation with a grave expression. "Brothers and sisters," he began with a voice echoing off the stone walls, "today I am not going to give the sermon I had prepared. Today we have among us a young woman who needs to speak truths that have been silenced for too long, truths about justice, about hidden sins, about crimes that cry out to the heavens for redress." A murmur went through the church. The colonel straightened his back, alert. Reverend Dominic gestured to Cecilia. "Come, child, speak what needs to be spoken. God and this community are listening." Cecilia stood up, legs trembling, but forced herself to walk. Passed down the central aisle, feeling everyone's eyes carving into her. Climbed the steps to the pulpit, held onto the wooden edge so her hands wouldn't shake so much. From up there, she saw all the faces looking at her with curiosity, confusion, expectation. Before we continue, I want to ask you one more thing. If you are following this story and want to know how it ends, leave your like now and stay until the end, because what happens is going to surprise you. Cecilia took a deep breath, searched inside herself for the firm voice she needed. "My name is Cecilia Andrews," she began, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I am the daughter of Anthony Andrews and Amelia Andrews, both deceased. I grew up believing my father had died of a heart condition 6 months before I was born. I grew up believing my mother had died of a fever when I was 9. I grew up believing lies." She paused. Let the word settle. "Because my father didn't die of sickness, he was murdered, and my mother didn't die of fever. She was killed when she discovered the truth about my father's murder." The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed loud. The colonel remained seated, but Cecilia saw his jaw muscles tighten. She continued, gaining strength with every sentence. "In June of 1870, my father Anthony owned prosperous land with plenty of water and good soil, land someone wanted for himself. This someone offered to buy it several times, but my father refused, wanted to keep the land for me, for the daughter about to be born. So this someone decided if he couldn't buy, he'd take by force." Cecilia looked directly at the colonel. "And sent 3 men to my father's house on a dark night. Sent them to scare, sent them to force the sale. But my father was a man of honor, resisted, threatened to report it. So one of the men shot, killed my father with a bullet, buried the body in a secret grave on his own land, and afterward forged documents saying my father had debts and had sold everything before dying." The murmurs started, first low, then growing. People turned to look at one another, incredulous. "My mother never knew," Cecilia continued, voice starting to crack but forcing herself on. "She believed the lie, sold the land for a miserable price, raised her daughter in poverty, carrying the pain of widowhood, which was actually murder. Until 9 years later, I don't know how, she found out the truth, confronted the killer, threatened to expose everything. A week later, she was dead. Sudden fever, they said. But we all know sudden fever can be poison well administered." "This is madness!" the colonel's voice thundered through the church. He had stood up, face red with rage. "This girl is delirious, making up absurd stories to get out of the engagement she made with me." Judge Theobald also stood up, raised the folder. "It is not madness, Colonel," he said with a calm voice that cut like a blade. "I have here documents that prove everything she is saying. Original deeds, forged documents, clerk's records showing the discrepancies, and a complete confession from an eyewitness who participated in the crime under your orders." The colonel went pale. "What witness?" "Tobias Fletcher," replied the judge. "Your former henchman who was present the night of Anthony Andrews' murder, who helped bury the body, who helped forge the papers. He kept copies of everything these years, and before dying yesterday confessed everything in a written deposition notarized by the court." "Lies!" the colonel shouted, but his voice had lost its strength. "Tobias was a drunk, a liar. He serves as no witness." Sheriff Campbell stood up too, hand near his gun. "The proofs speak for themselves, Colonel. Documents don't lie, dates altered, signatures forged, ledgers doctored. All pointing to you as the intellectual author of theft, forgery, and 2 murders. The church exploded in loud murmurs. People stood up, arguing amongst themselves, some defending the colonel, saying it was impossible, he was a respected man. Others recalling strange things, old stories, folks who had disappeared or died conveniently when they opposed the colonel. The commotion grew, chaotic. That was when Reverend Dominic struck his staff on the floor 3 times, hard, restoring some order. Silence. His voice had authority coming not from force, but accumulated respect. "This is the house of God, not a market. Let us hear to the end before judging." He looked at Cecilia. "Continue, child." Cecilia felt tears coming down but didn't wipe them. Let them see her pain, her anger, her truth. "I was going to marry this man," she said, pointing to the colonel. "In 3 days I was going to become the wife of my parents' murderer, was going to sleep in his bed, bear his children, spend the rest of my life beside the man who destroyed my family. Because I didn't know. No one told me. Everyone believed his lies because he is powerful, rich, respected, because men like that always manage to make lies turn into truth. But now I know," Cecilia continued, voice steady again, "and I won't stay silent. I won't let my parents be forgotten, their deaths without justice, their lives reduced to convenient lies. Those lands were theirs. They are mine by right. And this man," she pointed again, "will answer for everything he did, will answer here, on earth, before the justice of men, and afterward will answer before God." The colonel was shaking with rage. His men at the door had hands on their guns, waiting for an order. The tension was so dense it felt like the air would snap. It was Uncle Sebastian who broke the moment, standing up with a choked voice. "Cecilia," he said, and there was deep shame on his face. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. If I knew the colonel had—" He couldn't finish the sentence, just sat down again, head in his hands. Mrs. Mercedes also stood up, the old neighbor with tears in her eyes. "Amelia was my friend," she said for all to hear. "I was with her when Cecilia was born, held her hand during labor. She spoke of her husband with such love, such longing. If someone killed him, if someone killed her later, that person deserves no mercy, deserves to pay for what they did." Other voices began to join in. One by one, people who had known Anthony and Amelia, who remembered them as good, honest folk. Mr. Augustus from the store recalled how Anthony always paid on time, always treated everyone with respect. An old woman remembered how Amelia had cared for her son when he was sick, asking nothing in return. The memories accumulated, building an image of 2 people who had been ripped from the world by greed and malice. The colonel saw control of the narrative slipping through his fingers, tried one last play. "Reverend," he said with a voice trying to sound reasonable, "this girl is disturbed by grief, by confusion. You shouldn't allow her to stain my reputation with unfounded accusations in this holy house." Reverend Dominic looked at him with an expression mixing pity and disgust. "Augustus," he said, using the first name deliberately without title. "I baptized you when you were a child, married you to your late wife, buried your parents. I always wanted to believe there was goodness in you, but now I see perhaps I have deceived myself all these years." The The Reverend's words were a condemnation more devastating than any legal charge. If even the preacher doubted him, the colonel had lost the community, and a powerful man without community support is nothing but an isolated tyrant. The colonel understood this, saw in the faces around not respect or fear anymore, but suspicion, anger, repulsion rising. He took a step back, then another. "You will all regret this," he said with a low, dangerous voice. "All of you. You'll find out what happens when you turn against me." His men at the door moved, but Sheriff Campbell was already pointing his gun. "Nobody leaves here until we settle this," he said firmly. "Colonel Augustus Vance, in the name of the law, you are under arrest for the murders of Anthony Andrews and Amelia Andrews, for forgery of documents, for illegal appropriation of property, and for threats against authorities and witnesses." The colonel's two men looked at each other, undecided. They were loyal henchmen, but not crazy. They weren't going to start a shootout inside a full church. The colonel realized he had no way out. His hand went toward the gun in his holster, but three things happened simultaneously. The sheriff adjusted his aim, the judge shouted, "Don't be a fool," and Reverend Dominic placed himself between them, arms open. "Enough violence," said the Reverend, with a voice that admitted no disobedience. "Enough blood spilled in the name of greed. Augustus, if you have a drop of humanity left, if you have any fear of God, you will surrender peacefully, will face justice like a man, not like a fugitive coward." For a long, tense moment, no one knew what would happen. Then the colonel let out a bitter, empty laugh. "Justice," he repeated, as if the word were a joke. "There is no justice, only power exists, and I still have more power than all of you combined. But fine, I'll go to trial. I'll prove this is all a farce. And afterward, when I'm acquitted, I will destroy every single one of you, meticulously." The sheriff approached, handcuffs in hand. "Hold out your wrists." The colonel obeyed reluctantly, face distorted with hate. When the handcuffs clicked shut, something changed in the air. The man who had controlled that region for decades, through fear and influence, was being taken prisoner, handcuffed, humiliated before everyone. It was a fall impossible to recover from, regardless of the trial's outcome. Cecilia watched from the pulpit as the sheriff escorted the colonel to the door. When they passed her, the colonel looked one last time. In his eyes was hate, yes, but also something else, recognition. Recognition that that girl he had underestimated, whom he had tried to use as the final piece of his chess game, had been the one to topple everything. "You look like your mother," he said low, just for her to hear. "Stubborn, inconvenient, and fated to die young for not knowing when to keep quiet." The words were a threat, but Cecilia didn't tremble. "I prefer to die standing telling the truth than live on my knees swallowing lies," she replied, looking straight in his eyes. "And unlike my mother, I am not alone. I have the law, I have the community, and I have the memory of my parents giving me strength. You have already lost. You just haven't accepted it yet." The sheriff pulled the colonel, took him outside. The two henchmen followed, unsure what to do. The church stayed silent for long seconds. Then Reverend Dominic began to sing, voice old but firm, a psalm about justice and mercy. One by one, the people joined the song. Cecilia came down from the pulpit, legs finally giving way. Judge Theobald supported her, led her to the pew, sat beside her. "You were incredibly brave," he said softly. "Your parents would be immensely proud." Cecilia just nodded, too exhausted for words. The service ended shortly after, but no one left. People gathered around Cecilia, wanting to speak, wanting to touch her hand, wanting to offer support. Mrs. Mercedes hugged her, crying, "Your mother was a dear friend," she said. "I will testify at the trial, will tell everything I saw and heard in those days. I will help you get justice." Others offered too. Folks who had seen suspicious things over the years, but stayed quiet out of fear. folks who had debts with the colonel and were being extorted, folks who knew other victims of his. The web of crimes and abuses went far beyond what Cecilia had imagined. The colonel had built an empire of terror, small but efficient, and now that the first stone had fallen, the rest of the structure was crumbling along with it. The trial happened 3 weeks later. It was in the municipal hall, adapted for court because the town had no courthouse. Judges from a larger district came to ensure impartiality. The colonel had hired expensive lawyers from the capital, men in starched suits and big words. They argued that Tobias Fletcher was an unreliable witness, had been a drunk and confessed criminal, that his testimony was worth nothing. But Judge Theobald presented the documents meticulously organized, showed the original deeds side by side with the forged ones, pointed out the differences, called a handwriting expert who confirmed the signatures were from different people, presented the clerk's records showing the alterations, built a solid, irrefutable case based not on words but on physical evidence that couldn't be disqualified. And then came the witnesses. Mrs. Mercedes told about how Amelia had changed after discovering something terrible, how she had been terrified, how she had spoken of seeking justice. A former employee of the colonel testified about conversations he had heard, about strange orders, about nights the boss came back with mud on his boots and blood on his hands. A neighbor of the stolen lands told how he had seen suspicious movement that night in June 1870, men digging, but had kept quiet out of fear. Cecilia also testified, told about the storm, about finding Tobias, about everything he had revealed, told about Tobias's last moments, about how he had died trying to fix his mistakes. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't waver when the lawyers tried to confuse her, intimidate her, discredit her. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 4th day, the jury met, deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman was pale but resolute, read the verdict with a clear voice. Guilty of premeditated murder of Anthony Andrews, guilty of murder of Amelia Andrews, guilty of forgery of documents, guilty of illegal appropriation of property, guilty of obstruction of justice. The sentence was harsh. 25 years in prison, without possibility of reduction. All properties acquired illegally would be returned to legitimate owners or heirs. In the case of Anthony Andrews' land, it would return to his daughter Cecilia. The colonel heard it all without expression, as if he had disconnected from reality. When the guards took him away handcuffed, he didn't look back. Cecilia watched him being taken and didn't feel joy, felt only weariness, relief, and a strange emptiness where the anger had been. Justice had been done, but it didn't bring her parents back. Didn't erase 19 years of lies, didn't cure the pain, just close the wound so it could start to scar. The land was officially returned 2 months later. Cecilia walked the property she had never seen, but was hers by blood and right. Saw the trees her father had planted, the creek he had loved, the earth he had died protecting. Found, with help from one of the men who had confessed participation in the crime, the place where the body had been buried. Exhumed the remains, gave her father a proper burial beside her mother in the town cemetery. But Cecilia didn't stay on the land. Didn't want to live alone in a place haunted by memories that weren't hers. Instead, she transformed the property into something new, something that would honor her parents' legacy in a way that made sense. Created a refuge, a place where women running from forced marriages, from violent husbands, from impossible situations, could come and find shelter. Built several small cabins, planted a large garden, created a space of healing and new beginnings. She called the place Amelia's Haven, in honor of her mother. The first woman she received was a 16-year-old running from a fiancé 30 years older. Cecilia opened the door, extended her hand, and said the words Tobias had said to her that stormy night. "Come, you are safe now. It isn't too late. You arrived in time." Over the years, dozens of women passed through the haven. Some stayed weeks, others months. Cecilia taught them to read, to write, to manage money, to know their rights, helped them find work, rebuild lives, become independent. Some came back later to thank her, bringing healthy children, stories of happy lives that wouldn't have existed without that place of welcome. Cecilia never married, not because she lacked opportunities, but because she had found a purpose greater than romance. Had found a way to transform her pain into help, her trauma into a tool of liberation for others, and that filled her heart in a way marriage couldn't. Judge Theobald visited frequently, became a dear friend and advisor, helped with legal matters, with paperwork, with difficult cases. Reverend Dominic also came, brought blessings, conducted prayers, offered spiritual comfort to the wounded women. Mrs. Mercedes became a constant presence, teaching the younger ones to cook, to sew, to care for babies. 10 years after the trial, Cecilia was sitting on the porch of the Haven's main house, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. She was 30 now, hair still dark, but with some premature white strands, face marked not by bitterness, but by purpose, hands calloused from honest work, heart scarred, but not hardened. A young woman approached, shy. She was new at the Haven, arrived just 3 days ago, still frightened, still processing the escape. "Miss Cecilia," she said softly, "can I ask something?" Cecilia smiled, gestured for the young woman to sit beside her. "Of course, dear. Ask whatever you want." The girl hesitated, then spoke. "Why do you do this? Why help us like this, asking nothing in return?" Cecilia looked at the horizon, thinking of the best way to answer. "I do it because someone helped me when I needed it," she said finally. "An old man, burdened with guilt, who decided he was going to do one right thing before dying. He gave me truth, gave me justice, gave me a chance to start over. Now I pass that forward, because that's how we honor those who saved us, saving others." The young woman absorbed that in silence. Then, with a voice almost inaudible, asked, "Do you think I'll also be able to be happy again?" Cecilia took the girl's hand, squeezed gently. "I think you'll do more than that," she said with conviction. "You'll discover you were stronger than you ever imagined. That surviving is just the start. That life after trauma can be good, can be full, can have meaning, just needs time, patience, kindness with yourself, and you have all that here. You are safe now." The years kept passing. Cecilia saw generations change. Saw some of the women she had helped come back with daughters who needed the same refuge. Saw the world out there change slowly, laws improve a little, women gain a little more voice. Not enough, never enough, but something. Colonel Augustus Vance died in prison 8 years after his sentencing. Heart attack, an irony that didn't go unnoticed. Cecilia heard the news and felt neither joy nor sadness, just a chapter closing. He had lost everything he valued, power, respect, freedom, legacy, had died alone and forgotten, while the people he had hurt built beautiful lives on the ruins he had created. When Cecilia was 50, she fell ill. It was quick, aggressive, inexplicable. Doctors couldn't say exactly what it was, only that there was no cure. She received the news with the serenity of someone who had already made peace with mortality, had lived well, had made a difference, had honored her parents, had no regrets. In the last weeks, while she was bedridden but still lucid, the women of the Haven took turns caring for her, read to her, sang, told stories. Mrs. Mercedes, now very old, sat by the bed holding her hand, just as she had done with Amelia decades ago. The circle closing. On the last night, Cecilia asked to be alone, wanted silence, wanted peace. Lay looking through the window at the stars and thought about everything she had lived, the escape in the storm, Tobias emerging from the shadows, the terrible revelation about her parents, the descent down the canyon, the confrontation in the church, the trial, the creation of the haven, the hundreds of women who had passed through there, each with a unique story of pain and courage, thought of how it all started with urgency. Come with me before it's too late. Words that had saved her life, changed her destiny, given her a chance to do something good with the pain she had been dealt, and realized that urgency had become her life's mission. There was always someone who needed to be saved before it was too late. There was always a storm, literal or figurative, where someone was getting lost, and there was always a choice to extend a hand or turn away. Cecilia had spent 3 decades extending her hand, and that, she realized as consciousness began to slip gently toward the final sleep, had been enough, had been a life well lived, had been justice not only obtained but practiced, had been a legacy her parents would have loved. She closed her eyes for the last time with a smile on her lips. And if in the passage between life and death there is a moment of clarity where we see who awaits us, Cecilia saw 3 people. Her father Anthony, a man she never knew, but whose blood and courage ran in her veins. Her mother, Amelia, whose kindness and strength had shaped who she became, even in death. And Tobias Fletcher, the guilty man who had chosen redemption, who had saved her in the storm, who had died giving her weapons to fight. All 3 were smiling. And Cecilia understood then that justice isn't just about punishing who does wrong. It's about honoring who was lost. It's about protecting who can still be saved. It's about transforming pain into purpose. It's about extending a hand in the storm and shouting, "Come with me before it's too late," even when it's easier, safer, to hide in the shelter alone. Cecilia Andrews was buried beside her parents in the Blackwood Creek Cemetery. The funeral was immense, bigger than any other the town had seen. Hundreds of people attended. Women she had helped came from distant cities, bringing children and grandchildren, carrying stories of lives that wouldn't have existed without her. They brought flowers, filled the cemetery with colors and scents. On the headstone, by collective decision of the women of the haven, they carved not just name and dates, but a simple phrase that captured who she had been. Cecilia Andrews. She extended her hand in the storm. Amelia's haven continued functioning after her death. The older women assumed administration, kept alive not just the place, but the spirit that had created it. Decades later, when finally laws changed enough and society progressed a little, the haven was transformed into a museum and educational center. But it remained, in essence, a place of welcome and hope. And to this day, when the storm comes, metaphorical or literal, when someone is lost, scared, desperate, not knowing where to go or who to turn to, there are still people who extend a hand. There are still those who say, "Come with me," before it's too late. Because a legacy of courage doesn't die with the one who creates it. It multiplies, inspires, perpetuates. The story of Cecilia Andrews, of her parents Anthony and Amelia, of Tobias Fletcher, and of all the women who found refuge when they needed it, is a reminder that truth always finds a way to the light, that justice may delay but can arrive, and that a single person with enough courage can change destinies, can save lives, can leave the world a little better than they found it. And this is the true story of a young woman who got lost in the storm and found not just salvation, but purpose, who transformed tragedy into triumph, who honored the dead by saving the living, and who proved that it is never too late for the truth, never too late for justice, never too late to extend a hand and say, "Come with me. You don't have to face the storm alone."